Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Money for some of those projects. When selecting them, plans are made based on what the intended improvement, what gains are we going to get from that intended improvement. And so today we have a really unique chance, I think, to talk about looking at some of the highway projects that we have been involved in most recently. And what data do we have that says, did we get what we thought we were going to get when we invested in that project? So what were the outcomes for the highway infrastructure improvement related to safety, related to improved mobility, and related to economic development? So we have a very nice panel of that conversation. We certainly invite your comments and questions at any point throughout our conversation today. We're going to look at those projects and how we might measure impact. Looking specifically at the County Highway 71 corridor, 13 and 21, 13 and 42, and 169 and 41. And looking at what do we know about those projects and our investment in them. First, I'd like to introduce my co-facilitator, Danielle. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, commissioners, and members of the panel. Thanks for having me. I'm Danielle Fox. I'm from Scott County Health and Human Services, and I'm the Adult Social Services Manager.
Thank you. Next, I'd like the people on our panel to introduce themselves, and I'm just going to go down the list on my notes. So, Tony, would you start?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Chris and Danielle, and other panel members here. Welcome to be happy to be here. Tony Winnicky, County Engineer.
Craig?
Craig Jensen, Transportation Planning Manager.
John?
John Rudolph, Graduate Engineer.
Chad?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. My name is Chad Bonesock. I'm with Property and Taxation Services.
Nathan?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nathan Abney. I'm a transportation planner at Scott County.
Ben?
Good morning. This is Ben Picone, a transit planner from Minnesota Valley Transit Authority.
All right, I want to thank all of you for being here with us for this conversation today and for putting together the materials we're going to use. And with that, we're going to get started. So I wonder, first of all, if someone could start out and just explain when you are considering a highway project, how specifically are outcomes identified as part of that work, that initial planning work?
Yeah, I can start off. So as you know, we are very much a data-driven group, and everything that we do is reliant on that to make decisions. Obviously, we're fiscally constrained as an organization, so we need to make sound engineering decisions. And we have a transportation improvement program, and it is 10 years, so it's a good length of time. And so we use this data to program our projects, whether that's expansion projects, management preservation projects, safety projects, working with our agency partners to best position projects within here. So it's extremely important, the timing of these projects. And I say that because if you look at our program, and we've built out our transportation system a lot with expansion projects the last couple decades, and last decade in particular. But the timing of those projects, if we build out something too soon, we also have expenses with building those projects out as well. We've got ongoing operations responsibility, and there comes a cost with that as well. And if we wait on our projects, then we risk safety and congestion problems on our system as well. So timing is really important. So we use this data to best determine when we're going to build these projects or make improvements on the existing roadways that we have.
Tony or others, on page 10, it outlines the annual new construction that's added to the corridor. Does this have any connection to what is spent on highway or transportation projects in the county? And are they keeping up with what we need to do to keep things moving as a fast-growing community?
So can we pull that slide up maybe? I don't know if that's...
Yeah, let me share my screen. Can you see that, Tony?
Yep, so I think she's going to page 10. Or so it's the performance measure, I think is what she's.
I'm gonna get rid of this.
Okay, so I'll offer a little insight on this, and then I'll have Chad jump in here as well, since this is really getting into economic development. So tracking economic development is it's a little tricky and difficult to look at one particular project or improvements on a corridor and what kind of impact that has on that. County 17, this corridor has been in the path of growth. So we focused this corridor with in this packet, and there's significant projects in here. So starting in 2011, 13, and 14, we made major investments and improvements on this roadway from a 2-lane facility to a 4-lane facility. And so, you know, like I said, is in the path of growth already. And you look at the development that happened after those improvements, going from a 2-lane to a 4-lane facility. We removed a ton of access points, both from a private access standpoint and a public access point. And it's not to say that we simply got rid of those properties. A lot of them were consolidated or moved to frontage or backage roads. And so all of those roads and those homes out there now have access to signalized intersections along that corridor. And so that was a huge safety improvement. So our data kind of shows that out, and we'll get into that in a little bit, I hope here. So I'm always excited to share success of this particular corridor and what we did. Like I said, the timing of this is really important. Traffic had started to pick up. We had safety problems out there. Crashes were picking up, both from the crash rate and severity rate. And so timing of that was good in building that out. And the facility that we have now is very much a mobility corridor. This isn't the most important north-south roadway we have in the county. As we're building this out, it's right through the heart of the county. And so we're building this system out long-term in a timely fashion. So building it down to 42, which is also another principal arterial roadway. And at some time in our program, we've got that next segment later in our 10-year program down at County Highway 82. And so, like I said, the timing of when that happens will be very important. Chris or Chad, maybe you can jump in and talk a little bit about economic development and what that means once this corridor was completed.
Sure. Thank you, Tony. In this particular example, you'll see that, and this isn't uncommon for other projects as well. You'll see that in 2014, there was a significant amount of new construction that was added to the tax rolls for that year. And I believe that the project hadn't even started yet. The project, I think, was taking place during around 2015 and 2016. And so this is kind of a typical example of what you might see for a highway project similar to this in a growth area where you'll see investment even prior to the project even starting. And then that after the project continues, or after the project is complete, I should say, you'll see another wave of investment after that. Not all of these projects are going to look exactly like this, but this is a pretty typical trend of what you might see in a growth area.
That is, as the highway folks are making plans for highway projects, are people from your office involved in that? Are there projections about how much growth we want to see in some of these new areas?
We haven't really done a lot of tracking on that information. You know, it really does vary by project and area. If you have an area that's not necessarily a growth area, it might be an area where there's already development might be at its full potential already. If this, you know, a project might be more of a safety thing, where you might not see as much economic investment in the area. But this particular area, with it being a growth area, shows, you know, what kind of investment you can achieve from an expansion of the roadways.
Okay.
I will add to that this is a new performance measure that we're trying to track and get our hands around. You know, how closely tied is our road system to economic development? And so we're trying to find the best way to show that and track that.
And one other thing, Tony, the one that we've really started, I guess would consider the first one that we really started tracking would be the 16941 interchange, where we actually did some projections a few years back when the federal funding was being applied for. And now that interchange is done, we'll be able to kind of see how that pans out over the next several years with development in that area.
Nice.
I would guess, and hearing you talk about timing is everything and these plans are 10 years out, what are some of those trends that you're seeing within transportation safety overall? And then how has that been impacted by COVID-19 and the changing travel rates?
Yeah, John, why don't you jump in on this one?
Yeah, so overall, we've been seeing a pretty steady decline year to year in the number of crashes per vehicle miles traveled on the county system. We're talking specifically about impacts from COVID. I pulled some numbers, and system-wide, we were down 27% total in crashes. We had 50% less fatalities 2019 compared to 2020. And then 22% less injury crashes 2019 compared to 2020. So generally speaking, with COVID, there were less people on the road, so we're going to have less crashes overall.
So I'll expound on that a little bit with the slide that's up here. This is our key performance indicator, and I think this one is like really telling. This is our big roll up right here, because it really is a compilation of everything we do, from planning at the county with our work with local agencies and establishing local roads so our systems operate as they should based on roadway classification. It's been a huge concerted effort, and what we're doing, and so the planning of that's kind of easy, right? When you say there's not a road here and this is how it should look, but the execution of that is oftentimes tough to carry that out when it's the 11th hour and you're actually going to build something. So adhering to what we're planning for is really oftentimes the challenge, but we've had great success in what we have done here the last decade or two in particular. Great planning efforts, executing those, and then with our using data to appropriately select projects that we're putting into our program and making improvements, designing them right, and then operating our systems accordingly. Our maintenance group does an amazing job. And our signal operations, we've made a lot of improvements in those areas. And this is a reflection of all of that. And so we're the bottom line there. And so you see how we have continued to trend downward. The top line is the metro, of which we're part of that purple line as well. So you take us out of there, and that doesn't look nearly as well. It looks flatter. That's very flat the way it is right now. But you can see how Scott County has continued to trend downward. And so that is really using the data to build out our system and manage and maintain our system as best we can. And I think we're doing an awesome job.
That's a really nice overview, Tony. Thank you for kind of pulling that back to that high level. Can we, I didn't want to move on from the County Highway 17 projects. It sounded like there were some pieces about safety that your team wanted to talk about. We did talk a little bit about the economic development piece, but it sounded like you had some pieces you wanted to talk about in terms of safety. So can we look at that for a minute before we move on?
Sure.
So looking at some of these slides. So this is volume of traffic and number of crashes, right?
Yep. So there's a lot of information on here. Yeah. It's very busy. But when we look at the segment in which we made improvements, it's kind of right in the middle there. It's that County Road 16 to 42. So if you can focus on that area, you will see the improvements that we made. And so these are 3-year blocks from 2012 to 14. And those are the years that we had the projects in building that out. And you can see a significant drop in the number of crashes in the subsequent years. So I think that is very telling to the investment and improvements that we made on that particular segment. And we did this so talking about timing of projects again and being fiscally constrained, we did this over 3 different projects. So we actually built the 17 and 42 grade separated green T, and then we built the section north of 78, and then we filled in the gap after that. And we did that because we felt we could be successful in securing federal funds for these projects, of which we did. So all 3 of these projects, we were successful in receiving federal funds, and not sure we could have taken on that entire burden or be successful if we didn't do it that way. So it ended up being a win-win.
All right, on page 14, there's some additional safety data around County Road 17. So there's the severity rates, and then the next slide is actually crash rates. So when you look at this, is there anything, as we evaluate, were the investments that we put into County Highway 17, did we see the results we intended? As you look at this safety data, as you look at the economic development data, like what's your conclusion about that?
Yeah, again, if you look at that section right in the middle, that 16 to 42 area right there, you'll see the timing of that and what that meant for our projects and the severity. The severity is a weighted value of injury crashes. And so you can see, looking at the green, the pink and the purple line, how we've trended down in that area by making improvements in that and that segment of roadway.
Okay.
A lot of this data is from year to year. Do you have further detail or analysis that you're looking at here, say if there's a seasonal impact on safety?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we do, and we've got some entertainment venues obviously here. We've got Canterbury and Mystic Lake and Renaissance Festival and Seavers and Fall Festival and Valley Fair. And so we do have entertainment venues, and we've got winter here as well. And so it's hard to look specifically at winter by the calendar because we may have snow in October and April, and the next year it's sunny and 90 in October and April, or right up to Christmas. So it's hard to gauge that, but we do look very specifically at all of our crashes. So, because it's not that any one location has hundreds of crashes, but the crashes that do occur, you can look at all of the records and then review the specific data for trends in that crashes to see if there's system problems or what that is. Can we make improvements from a safety standpoint? Is it a capacity issue because there's just not enough capacity on the roadway to handle the traffic? Whatever that is. So we do look at specific locations and all of the data. And maybe, John, would be a good time for you to kind of jump in here and talk about all the things that we can get out of that data and what we use that for.
Yeah, so we get, it's basically the crash report that is filled out by the police officer responding to the crash. So we have all the details about, which directions the motorists were driving, the manner of the collision, whether it was a rear end or an angle crash. We get information about the lighting conditions, the weather, and the road surface conditions at the time of the crash. And we're able to summarize that and prepare charts where we can quickly look at all of the crashes for a date range and pick out any patterns that may exist.
Thanks, John. I think that kind of tipped me off on a couple other items here to mention in this area. So around these big entertainment venues, so we have incorporated some driver feedback signs, some dynamic message signs around the Canterbury area and Valley Fair. So in working with MnDOT and having access to put messages out there that are most appropriate to help manage traffic on 169 and County Road 101 and County Road 83. We've got additional cameras out there. We got additional vehicle detectors out there. We'll be enhancing that this next year when our 83 project comes to completion by additional signing on 83, dynamic message signing to help people get in and out of Canterbury events. When John mentioned snow and ice conditions, we've used that data to help identify where we have locations in rural areas in which we've got blowing and drifting snow. And so we've got a roundabout project on County Road 2 and 15 going in this summer, just north of New Prague. And we're working toward putting up a snow fence in that area where we know we have blowing and drifting snow.
Tony, you've talked about the county highways and our crashes, but will you talk about the significance of the system? It seems to me that a big part of what happened on 17 was that we worked on a local road system as well.
Yes, great point. Thanks, Leslie. So as part of reducing the sheer number of access points on there, it was like 19 access points, private driveways and 5 city street connections that we removed off of those and located them on frontage backage roads. And we worked with the city of Shakopee and helped build Jennifer Lane, which is a north-south roadway paralleling County Road 17 on the east side of the roadway. So it's those connections that then get people to one access point so they can all on east and west side of the roadway get to County Road 78 where there's a traffic signal and there's safe means to get on and off of 17 and storage with turn lanes to get them out of through lanes when there's vehicles moving through. So it's a very concerted effort working with the local agencies. And this is extremely, extremely important in what we do and establishing these systems as a whole. It's not just us building roadways. It's not just the city building roadways. It has to be a collective system. And so all of this is identified in our 2040 comp plan, which sets the, what we're building toward. And so it identifies future principal arterial roadways, other arterial roadways down to collector and local streets. And so it's important that, like I said, it's one thing to plan for them. It's the other thing to execute them. And access points is a huge part of what we do to get these facilities to operate as efficient as they can. If it's a mobility corridor, if it's more of a local corridor, and make sure that we're providing safety on all of these roadways.
So I would ask, like, looking at, so we've just looked at quite a bit of data from County Highway 17 and how that's impacted safety, how it's impacted economic development. Are there any places where that project or those projects fell short of what your desired outcome was?
I would say that areas in which we maybe fell short were parts of those projects. So when you look at County Road 17 and 42, as much as we made significant improvements, there's still a few private driveways along that roadway. On County 42 that we built out years ago, there's still a few private driveways on that roadway. And that has impact to mobility and safety. And so when the opportunity presents itself, we'll remove those and clean those up. We have purchase homes. We don't force people out of those, but when there's an opportunity, whether that's relocating an access point or that's buying that out to remove that access point, we're taking advantage of those opportunities. So there are several locations on 17 that we're still targeting to do that.
Okay. So that's work yet to come.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Can we move on to 42?
Sure.
Let's see. Danielle, did you have any other questions about County Road 17?
No, I was actually wondering about 42 as well. On page 9, I believe it is, it talks about Highway 42 and travel speeds. And your goal on that page, I believe it's page 9, your goal is 40 miles per hour, which I couldn't quite remember because I don't make that drive as much these days, but isn't the speed limit, right? So I'm just wondering about why is that goal 40 miles per hour and what sort of keeps us from reaching that goal in some points?
Sure. Okay, that's a great comment, question, inquiry. So obviously a ton of improvements been made on this roadway the last 30 years, really. So there was a study that was done in the mid 90s, and it looked at this entire corridor, and it really identified access points and improvements and building this out. And this is, first of all, 42 is the most important east-west corridor in South Metro. It's 30 miles from 169 over to Hastings. It's a long roadway, an extremely important roadway from a mobility standpoint, and it carries the most traffic of any county road in the state of Minnesota. There's nearly 60,000 vehicles a day near the 35 interchange area. And in our area from 13 to the county line over at Joppa Glendale, it's in that 35,000 vehicles a day. It carries a ton of traffic. And so when that study was done, it included project partners from Dakota and Scott County and MnDOT and like 13 cities across that length of roadway. And so when you look at our section here, and this 40 miles per hour was a targeted peak hour speed as far as the mobility corridor. So it said, okay, what do we need to build out? What's a reasonable speed during the peak hours to still maintain this? Because we're not going to build an 8-lane facility. We're not going to keep it as a 2-lane facility. You know, what should that be to manage to keep it around a reasonable speed? So 40 miles per hour was identified as a reasonable speed during the peak hours. And you're right, it is posted at 55 miles an hour west of County Road 13, actually west of Boone, so just west of that. So from Boone Avenue west, and then east of that point, it is 50 miles an hour. And so good parts of the day, you can travel along at those speeds. But when it's those congested times of day, you know, what should we build out to make sure we're maintaining this as a principal arterial corridor with its main function as a mobility corridor? And so that's how that was established. And then you look at this performance measure here, and you can see in 96, it identifies that's what the current traffic was. And then if you looked at the hatch line back in the mid 90s, that's what they predicted that it would be. And so what improvements need to be made to bring that speed up, the average speed? So you can see then the next lines, well, actually it's the green line before that, but then the purple line is how we operate today. And so you can see we're doing quite well. That area on the far east side, that 27 to Glendale, and then the Glendale to the Burnsville Parkway is a short segment. But that's in excess of 35,000, vehicles a day on that roadway. So the improvements that we made, I think, have really shown, and this is a great figure to show that we're maintaining that as a mobility corridor.
Are there technology solutions to improving mobility, or is it all about construction and design?
Okay, that's a great one, and I'll have John jump in here and talk about some improvements we made with our signal operations there.
So from a technology standpoint, we recently did a signal optimization project on that corridor from our signal at the intersection of 27 and 42 all the way down to Glendale and 42. And what this allows traffic to do is it allows traffic to go all the way through from 27 down to Glendale without stopping at a red light. And this also is beneficial from a safety standpoint. We're expecting to see less rear ends as people are able to go all the way through that stretch without stopping. And we're also expecting to see improved safety at the stop-controlled side street intersections along that stretch as well, due to the better platooning, and it'll allow motorists turning or crossing at those side streets to find better gaps in the traffic.
Is there some sweet spot to this? Like, I use 42 more often now because it's easier to drive through there than it was when I started working in Scott County. And so is there a point as you make these improvements, you make an improvement, more people use the roadway? You know what I mean? Is there a balance or a tipping point where your improvements bring forward so much traffic that needs to be reassessed or redesigned?
There is. That's a great question, and partly what you see on the right side of this figure, or the eastern part of that corridor, when the volume of the roadway simply gets past it, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what you do out there. The volume is just too great for that roadway to handle the capacity. And then you have to put in more capacity. And when I say capacity, that's lanes and traffic carrying ability. So getting traffic off of the roadway with turn lanes, appropriate number of turn lanes, length of storage out there so people don't get bottled up. And then, so it's one thing to operate it as efficiently as you can, and we've made strides in that area, but you reach a point where it's just too much. Our busiest at-grade intersection that we have in the county is at 42 and 13. And so obviously we just completed a project in 2019. It was through 2018 and 19, finished that up. And we really built that. We made improvements out there, but we also set it up for a 6-lane facility when that time comes. And we did that by establishing the south curb line. So we know and establish utilities, which there's a ton of utilities out there. So when we go to expand that in that area to a 6-lane facility, we'll do that simply by building to the north of the roadway. And the south line is already set.
Hey, Tony, this is Mike. Back to the timing, the signal thing on 42 there. Are you telling me that you have not yet coordinated Quebec Avenue with 42 and 13?
John, can you speak to that? I believe that whole corridor is done. Now recognize that 13 and 42 is operated by the state.
The MnDOT.
So we do have, obviously we've got a little concern at the county here because there is more traffic on 42 than there is on 13.
Yes.
And yet that's a 13 corridor that MnDOT operates.
So I've driven through that piece 4 or 5 times. You know, I always accused you of having that signal identify my car. And I've made it through on green several times. So perhaps my praise of you was premature.
Dang it.
Tony, can I ask, how many signals are there between like 17 and into the county line? Is it 8 or 10?
I'd have to add them up. It sounds right.
Too much.
But so is the goal, well, you maybe can't do the 42 and 13, but the goal to maybe at some point just be able to, if you hit a green light down by 83 on the west end, go all the way through without. Hit a green light on that road, I swear.
It is a good question, but you know, obviously things are focused around and timed around the major intersection, and that is 13 and 42. So it's a long distance, you know, from 18, and traffic drops off west of 13 right now. So it's the other 3 legs that have more traffic. And the further you go west, you get to 18, and west of 18, you know, it drops off even a little bit more. But, you know, in the future, when that all develops, and yes, you'll be able to hit those, you know, platooning of vehicles coming through there, but there still may be a stop at that 13 and 42 just because that's the controlling intersection. You know, likewise, you know, much more flowing and platooning from the county line to 13 on the eastern side of 13. You know, and oftentimes you get a lot of dispersion, you know, over a length of time. You know, it's not to say everybody is going from 13 into Burnsville or from 17 into Burnsville. You know, there's a lot of commercial activity and neighborhoods and things like that. So people do drop off at certain points along that. So sometimes you're platooning and how people drive on the roadway. Some are faster, some are slower. So your platoon of vehicles may disperse, and then the signal would pick that up and say, hey, there's not that many cars in a row here. I think I'll switch the green and give it to the side street at this time.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Tony, yeah, I hate to jump on this and let this secret out, but 42 moves. And I'm assuming we've done our optimization in conjunction with Dakota County, because several times in the last month or 2 months, I have made it from 13 to Rosemount or deep Apple Valley, like consistently.
Yeah.
You know, down speeds, but like did not hit a red light, and you have to know that I despise that chunk of road. That's our Reno. Yes, I have. I'm getting a gasp. I despise that road, but that has always been our Reno, where it's the longest, shortest road in the world. and now it actually flows. So it's noticeable. It's super noticeable.
Getting better, yep.
Great to hear. And then that's the intent. That's the function that it serves. I mean, these other roadways that lead to that. So if you're traveling a great distance and want to go there, that it should take you. If you're, coming out of Carver County and you go through the new interchange there and get onto 78 and down 17 and east over to 42 to get to Apple Valley, it should be as efficient as it can be. And so significant investments as a principal arterial. And obviously we just built last summer, the last segment of 42 from 17 to 83. And that's a huge improvement there as well. And so it's good to hear that it's working for many.
I do have a question in regard to that. Years ago, it was timed as well from basically probably not including 13 and 42, but from that area all the way to at least the Burnsville Center, it was timed. I'm thinking, I don't know if it's 10 or 15 years ago, but it was completely timed. And I wonder what happened. What happens when an area is timed and then all of a sudden you go, well, wait a minute, it's no longer timed. And I mean, I'm aware that there's been a couple stoplights added in. I know there was obviously the one at Target, right at Target, and then Huntington might have been changed a little bit. I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
Go ahead. How do we go out of time? When it was
so we did, admittingly, we had a break in our communications out there. We had a fiber line that we were relying on. And so we had a few breaks in there. So we are using GPS out there to coordinate our timing out there right now. So we've made significant improvements out there. And sometimes it's a matter of, taking the counts, understanding the traffic. They're all traffic actuated, meaning that they respond to traffic that's out there. And sometimes they can, you've got different traffic patterns out there. And when you do get over capacity on the roadway, that the volume is so great, sometimes it's hard to move that. We are down a little bit in our traffic volumes during this COVID time, and they're starting to rebound. So we are slightly down right now, but we're expecting that we'll continue to have better operations moving forward with what we're doing.
I'd like to go on to it looks at a user cost savings. And I'm wondering if someone can walk us through this slide and give me, that's hard to watch, I know, sorry. There we go. Wonder if one of you could walk us through this data and why it was important to you to pull it together and how you use it.
Sure, Nathan, this would be a great one for you to jump in on.
Yep, I can talk about that. So this measure is a new one that we developed, and it essentially ties back to mobility and congestion and that cost that's passed on to our roadway users within the county. So we know that congestion and related delays can come as a high price for our roadway users, and they should be considered when we examine costs for projects. Typically, these costs occur. There's a number of factors that come into play when determining this, such as loss of time waiting in traffic, your vehicle wear and tear, fuel loss due to congestion. So MnDOT actually has a standard that we used to calculate this annual cost savings for our users, and then we compared that to our traffic patterns within the county. So as you can see, in 2018, there was a high user cost. And then after the project, that was reduced because we improved mobility and eliminated some of the congestion at this intersection.
All right. So
if I could just add one point to that, the one part of this that doesn't factor in here, and Nathan, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it doesn't identify like your commercial traffic, your occupancy of users on the roadway. So recognizing that this is, there's a lot of goods that are being transported on through this intersection as well. And so if there's other means to show that, it would probably even show greater user cost savings by not delaying the transport of those goods and through commercial vehicles and such.
Yeah, that we have no way of telling what the value of a shipment is on a truck. So that is one thing that potentially we could look into in the future. But yeah, you're correct. There is no way of telling that at the moment.
All right.
Tony, you sort of touched on this throughout your different data slides and how collaboration plays into the overall functioning of the system and safety. Can you talk about some of those partnerships and what it takes to make that collaboration work with other counties, with our cities, and
yeah, it really starts with our comprehensive plan and developing that comprehensive plan, because again, it's a 10-year look, and projects over the course of that 10 years could shift around depending on need within that. And same thing with the local agencies, the cities, their capital improvement programs as well. And so we review each of them to see how they align with each other and make sure that we're hitting that. So that timing is, this project is really important for us. It's coming up in whatever that time frame is, 2, 3, 5 years, to make sure that they're aware of their cost sharing responsibility, since we all share in that responsibility. We changed that a few years ago. And so we're working off of that cost sharing policy. And so they're in line with that. So when that need happens, and sometimes the cities may drive that as well. They've got development coming in. We've got improvements that have to be made on our county system. And so there is, some private public funding. So a developer, would help fund a project because of their development. And we've got to make sure that our share of that aligns with the need of those developments. So this happens on an annual basis, that we review each other's plans and make sure that they align.
So the 169 and 41 project, was it one of those combined projects? Is that correct?
It was. There was this project is there's a tremendous number of funding sources that had to come together with this, and we were very successful in us leading that effort. And we were so successful that we added additional work to the project, and that was the area, the County Road 14 and frontage road system, because we had success with the state in particular on this particular project. But it took a very concerted effort to pull that together. Obviously, we used a lot of the transportation sales tax to help fund that, and that helped us successful in these federal solicitations by using that funding. So
Tony, I mean, that's a relatively new project, right? I'm going to try to pull that up. You're seeing some increases in mobility. All right, there's some data here on average speeds. This is a new project, so we don't have comprehensive outcome data on this project. But as you planned for this, as we got into this, what were you specifically looking for this project to do?
Maybe Craig or Nathan, this would be a good one to jump in. Craig was the design project manager on this.
Okay.
And so I'll have him jump in.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony. Really, it was mobility and safety. We looked at the 169 corridor, and you can look at, I think there's a travel couple slides ahead of this here. We talked about the user cost of delay. You look at, this is just for 169, and sitting at that signal and looking at all the folks that have to stop at that intersection and being delayed by that signal. And then there was the crash cost as well with signals. So it was a safety improvement and mobility improvement. And it really probably is an economic development improvement as well that's yet to kind of be assessed through the frontage roads we installed, the kind of the unknown economic development that's going to occur in the county because now people can move more freely throughout the county. along the 169 corridor, whether that's down in, further south in some of the smaller cities or additional development in Shakopee area as well. So it's really I think it hit the safety, the mobility, and the economic development is yet to be determined, but I think it's something that will be showing some benefits in the future.
So it's really all three of those buckets you were targeting with this improvement. So is that data that you're going to continue to track that you could bring back to the commissioners at some point?
Yes, I believe so. I like I said, the economic development is going to be something that we're going to have to get a handle on and really start tracking, but it's something that we can bring back.
All right. So, go ahead.
Well, if you don't mind, I want to jump on that comment here about economic development, because I think sometimes people think economic development, it's, bricks and mortar, and yet mobility is a performance measure of economic development. And you look at what happened to Scott County, it being the fastest growing county in the state the last couple of decades here, in great part because 169 bypass, and then several years later, the improvements that were made up at 169 and 494. It's a desirable place to live. It's a desirable place for people to move their businesses here because you have access and mobility to, all over the metro. And this particular project, a lot more efficient to communities to the south of here as well. And so I do think that that's an important piece of economic development is the functionality of our systems and the mobility of these high level roadways.
All right. As you look at the 13 and 42 project, as you look at the 169 project, are there places where those projects have not met expectations so far? Those are both relatively new projects, but early indicators. Are there any gaps or any places where those infrastructure improvements maybe aren't paying off?
Maybe it's too early on the 169 and 41. There's the improvements that were made there are, those are game changers right there.
Okay.
I would say maybe the one thing is, at some point you got to cut it off. We've got a railroad crossing, just to the north on 41. It would have been great to grade separate that, but at some point the project's got to be cut off.
Mm-hmm.
But the improvements that we've made and frontage road connections and a new overpass to the south, which is, those are game changers. And so I think it's been very successful to this point in accomplishing what we were to do out there. And that's reduce the congestion, improve mobility, improve safety. And then I think you mentioned 42 and 13.
Mm-hmm.
And again, significant improvements there, but it wasn't that wow factor when you're done, because that was the first phase of that. We know that at some point there'll be a larger facility going through there, and we'll be able to increase capacity through that intersection as an at-grade intersection. You look over in Burnsville at County Road 42 and Cedar, and it's an enormous intersection that carries a tremendous amount of volume. And, that's this intersection here as well, sometime in the future. So we have to make sure that we're making good decisions in how we are building this thing out. And so this was the first phase of that.
Thank you. Danielle, you had a couple COVID questions. Did you want to, just as we're kind of pulling this together, talk about that?
I think I was just curious, and you spoke to sort of the decrease in just travel, which connected to the number of accidents and fatalities. But, I think we've really seen our world just shift quite a bit. And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how does this impact your future planning, knowing that businesses might be working more remotely, sort of seeing the short-term impact of our summer venues that we have throughout the community. What are you guys thinking about in terms of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because this is really unlike, what we've seen before. The economic downturn that we had in 2009, 10 through 11, it was different. I think this really kind of let everybody realize they can work differently and remotely because everybody was affected. And so, traffic is down. There's a couple of slides in here that show the river crossings alone. And so you realize how much traffic is down on those river crossings. Moving ahead, it's hard to tell how quickly it'll rebound or if it'll rebound in its entirety. So it is a little bit of wait and see. This might be a good opportunity for Ben to jump in here because transit use is way down, and what they're anticipating with transit users moving ahead. So Ben, if you don't mind jumping in on this.
When I heard COVID, I had a feeling transit was going to come up. So that's good. Yeah, if we can go to slide, I think it's page 34 for MBTA transit. Yeah, thank you. So this slide just kind of shows an overview, not just of Scott County, but of MVTA ridership across the board. So that includes our 3 cities in Scott County, Shakopee, Prior Lake, and Savage, as well as Dakota County. And the orange line shows kind of a typical year of transit. In this case, it's ridership in 2019, which is always just under about 3 million. The green line here shows the transit ridership in 2020. So you can see the kind of sharp decline in ridership starting in February through March and then kind of plateauing in April. One takeaway from showing this slide and the previous slide is that the ridership trends that we're seeing in our service area kind of really reflect both regional trends. We're seeing these trends on Metro Transit and the other suburban transit providers in the region, as well as national trends. So things that are happening in this region are kind of nothing that's unique to this region or nothing that we weren't kind of anticipating. But what we're doing at MVTA is kind of focusing on the data that we have and really closely monitoring all of those data sources to kind of be ahead of the game in terms of having service on the road and ready to go when transit does come back. So we're looking at ridership, both how many rides there are, but also what type of rides there are. We've seen a big drop in express ridership to downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul, but the ridership that we've seen remain has been kind of that local suburb to suburb service, maybe populations that are more dependent on transit, populations that are, even in the height of the pandemic, rely on transit to get to and from their jobs. We've been focusing on survey data as well. So reaching out to our riders, both the riders that are currently using our service and riders that previously have and are maybe currently working from home to try to anticipate timelines and future needs for those populations. We also kind of look at traffic data. So both on a local level and a regional level, what kind of traffic patterns we're seeing, because we often see that first traffic comes back and then there's kind of a lag that later results in transit coming back. So those two are definitely related on our end.
Ben, so you talked about there's a population that just depends on this type of transportation. And I think we see some of that population come through social services, and we have some really vulnerable folks that depend on this. And so how do you see that impacting them moving forward as far as costs going up or reliability or just the routes that are offered so that they can continue to get to those necessary appointments and work and things like that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'd say the entire pandemic has kind of given us, it's certainly been challenging, but it's also given us an opportunity to kind of reflect on how we're allocating our resources and how to best serve the populations that really need those resources. So for example, with the limited express service that we're running, we have a lot more operators and buses that we've been kind of exploring more local service, particularly along highway or County Road 42. We've seen a lot of transit dependent populations trying to get to and around that corridor. So kind of reallocating some of those resources that were previously tied up going to and from downtown, serving those populations in kind of within our region.
Nathan, do you mind speaking on SmartLink?
Yeah, kind of just echoing what Ben said. If you want to go to page 35. This is our dial-a-ride service within the county. The blue is the transit rides, and then the green is medical assistance. So similar to MBTA and regionally, there was that drop of ridership. But after speaking with our folks in SmartLink, they said that ridership is slowly beginning to come back. As you can see on the numbers below the chart, looking at December onward into 2021, there is this slow increase in ridership. And there's always been this underlying population that relies on this service. So there's always been the need for it. And the service has always been there for them to use during the pandemic.
This packet, there are 4 huge projects. I think you guys have done a great job of talking about those pieces and responding to the questions. Before we turn it back over to the commissioners though, is there anything that you wanted to point out that you didn't get a chance to speak to today? Were there any main points that we missed?
I would just say thank you to the board for supporting what we're doing because we are data driven and this data is important. And I think our data shows that we've been successful from a congestion mobility safety standpoint by using this data and making improvements and building out our system that we have today. And so thank you.
Any other comments from the panel about that? Anything else that you wish that you would have had a chance to highlight? All right, Mr. Chairman, then with that, I'll turn it back to you for any questions from the board.
I'm sure we have a bunch. If I could just ask one here, I don't know if you can even answer it, but I am wondering, you know, you showed the projections from, I think 1999 on County Road 42 and coupled with your improvements and maybe the projections weren't that good. I don't know, but they were quite a bit off. I don't know how you predict the future in terms of transit or roads, the need for roads. You know, in the past, we used to think of it just a steady uptick in congestion, uptick in usage of the roads and so forth. But with things like, I'm going to call it the Amazon effect or the online delivery of, excuse me, of things, autonomous vehicles coming, the COVID effect of working remotely. Excuse me, I don't know how you can predict, you know, what we need in the future. Do you have any comment on that? It just seems. Oh, and then also unrest and violence in our core city, and the perception that, you know, you hear people, I don't want to go down there. I just don't want to go there. And with the law enforcement issues. So, and I know Minnesota Valley Transit Authority is doing a lot more east-west with the Connect service, and maybe Ben should talk a little bit about that as well, the MBTA Connect, because that's pretty cool. And I just wonder if we'll do more east-west transit than we've ever done before. Obviously, there'll always be need for express service in the core city, or core cities. But any comments on how we could predict and what future trends we'd be looking at?
I'll offer a little bit, and several others here can surely chime in. But I think we are at a little bit of a crossroad. If you unpack all of those things that you mentioned, you brought up several good things. You know, where it's not the central business district of years gone by in St. Paul and Minneapolis. It is destinations that ring around St. Paul and Minneapolis and east-west travel as well. And so people are working in different areas. They're working from home a lot more. Technology is changing very rapidly with autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, that just, you know, types of transportation are changing across the board. You know, so where we are as a county right now, we've had a lot of expansion projects, you know, since the 169 river crossing happened. And you look at where our facility is, if you looked at a map and where we've expanded out to 4-lane facilities out there, we only have a few that are in our program over the next 10 years. And so it puts a lot more on the management and preservation, you know, of these systems to make sure that, you know, we're providing safety along roadways and systems that we currently have. So it may change a little bit of that focus. Have we built out enough for the time until there's, you know, substantial growth again, you know, outside of those expanded areas that we currently have. So it may change a little bit of our focus, you know, and then in looking ahead and how people do their daily lives and their work, that is changing. And so maybe I'll have a few others jump in here. I don't have an exact answer for you, Mr. Chair, sorry. But just recognizing that there is a lot that is changing and trying to get a handle on what that might look like moving forward from a transportation standpoint.
And I didn't want to make it sound like my comments are related to 1999 projections. They're off because of all the great work you guys did. So, I mean, I don't want to minimize the great work that you've done, you know, saying the projections were off. They were off because you made them be off because of the work done. Other comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a couple. First, Tony, you talked a little bit about collaboration and especially, I guess my question has to do with our collaboration and coordination with our cities and even township jurisdictions. You know, that's always there. There's a lot going on there because there's cost sharing, there's different goals for the systems when county roads are involved. I've heard great things recently from, for example, Belle Plaine on a charter on a new construction project being done. Just wondering if you or some of the other staff have ideas about how we can do even better and what we can do. So it's really a question for us, what we can do to further those relationships, to help make sure that the communication happens before there's miscommunication and problems. I see that as that political landscape, at least, is something we can impact. You don't want us impacting the technical things.
Yeah, thank you. I think in great part it is just getting out in front of them and having, you know, regular contact with them, you know, with each of those agencies, just so each are aware of what's coming down the road. And, you know, we always can do better in those areas. It's important that, you know, the more information we have, you know, the better that we're going to make decisions and vice versa. So the more we can get out and make regular contact with them. And I think we've made strides in those areas, but, you know, we can continue to make improvements. You know, sometimes things come up that are off the radar. You know, there might be, you know, whether it's a crash or something else that, you know, it becomes very emotional. And, you know, sometimes people want something done, and you look at the data and, you know, sometimes the do nothing alternative is the right alternative. And we look at safety around our system and, you know, you look at our serious injury crashes and, you know, 93% of that is some sort of driver error. It's not solely the road, it's not solely the car, but there's a driver, whether it's aggressive driving, making a poor decision, whether they're under the influence, they're not wearing a seatbelt, but it's an extremely high number that is upon the driver. So it's incumbent upon all of us. So I didn't want to distract there, but just that, you know, we need to make decisions with them and help with that education piece as well, both ways, in understanding what we want to do out there. And so it's not emotional decisions, but we're making sound decisions moving forward.
And keep us in mind when some of that regular communication is going to happen, if it would be helpful for, and I'm just going to guess speak for my colleagues, I think we'd all be willing to do that, be involved in those or be part of it when there's staff and electeds and as appropriate, let us know. And I think, Tony, something else you said that really resonated with me is as we get so many things built out, we're really looking at management preservation. And maybe that regular communication becomes even more important then, because those are the types of things where adjustments can be made on signals or signage or other things as development happens. So I really appreciate that and look forward to even continued communication. And now that we can get back out in person, maybe some in-person relationship building with those jurisdictions. I have several here, but I think I'm just going to pick what I think is most important. I think we have a tremendous opportunity on studying economic development and the impact of these construction programs with 169 and 41. Really a great start to gathering that data, seeing what was there prior to the improvements, what's there now, and how that's going to change. As much as some folks maybe weren't happy about relocating to a frontage road or things like that, I think we just know from history of system improvements like this that there is going to be increased economic development and growth there. And I really look forward to seeing that data over the next decade and how that project influenced and promoted economic development in that corridor, all the way down to 14, and with our future projects. So I'm excited about that, and I'm hoping even in next year we might see some of that baseline data and what's changed since we did that project. So I'll save my other one.
Okay, great comments, and yeah, we'll be anxious to track that as well, with both at the agency level and then with private business themselves. It'd be nice to know. I mean, what were some deciding factors in you relocating down here or starting a new business or whatever that is in this area? I have to believe that transportation is a big part of that.
Well, Tony, back years ago, we used to take regular tours and see things. It's been obviously more than a year since we've gone on any tours. I guess I could see one infrastructure / economic development, land use kind of tour in our future. I hope we can put something like that together.
Definitely.
Can I just make a couple comments here, Tony? It's nice to see that we're more proactive in, on our roads like 91 and 21. We put that stoplight in. Got a lot of good comments. I seem to hit that red light more than I would like to.
Morning, I hit a red light.
But anyhow, it really has been pretty good. I was driving through Wisconsin. I think it was actually yesterday, and I saw a sign on a road that said "dangerous intersection ahead," and I'm thinking, instead of putting just that dangerous, why don't you? There's a stop on the township road both ways. Why don't you just get another stop sign and a stop sign, make a 4-way stop, and make it not dangerous? Like, why point it out? Without doing something about it. And that's, I think, the difference. With us, we would never do. We'd say, let's go fix that intersection, get it done somehow. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Tony, if I may, and panelists. I first want to echo that. It's funny that you mentioned that a different state. As a state, we have great roads. We just do. Yeah, you go across the border. And
for the climate we're in. Yeah,
we just do. And as a county, we definitely have great roads. And technically, I have now all adult children, but I'm still going to say, they're still young drivers. So that's important to me. But Tony, you mentioned too that we are fiscally constrained. Certainly as the county and definitely as a state, because if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times, the resounding gong of MnDOT. We have no money. We have no money. So there's that reality or perspective. I'm not 100% sure, but that's where I was leaning towards. And then the chair's comments, I echo the same thing of like, hey, autonomous vehicles is here. Maybe it's not the Jetsons, but it's those things need to be considered. Along with everything else you mentioned, so I won't go through that again, but I don't want to say business as usual is dead when it comes this way, but business as usual is kind of dead. Thank you for punctuating that. It's a great sound effect right there. I don't know if it came through. So not necessarily a question, just comment of, how making sure that we are changing our perspective, and you guys are the experts when it comes to traffic for sure. And it shows with our system that we have, but yeah, not getting stuck in the business as usual mode, because it's easy. I'm a creature of habit and routine, and looking out beyond our comfort zone so that we can take those changes that are here head on. That's just a comment I wanted to make. So, but thanks for the awesome roads. They truly are different and safe. So thank you for that.
Mr. Chair, just a couple comments, if I may. Tony, first of all, I'm a little shocked on my system. Last week, late in the week, I had occasion to cross the ferry bridge at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was jammed up back to Home Depot. And I thought, whoa, business must be getting back to normal. Well, no, it was the street sweeper on the bridge. Pushed 4 lanes into 2 and the rolling roadblock kind of thing. But for a moment there, I thought, I realized how much we've grown accustomed to not having that traffic jam because things have changed. Particularly as the chairman was talking about people not going downtown to go to work. Our park and rides have been pretty much vacant or empty for a year and a half now. Just some observations on how things have changed and what that means. But let me give you this kudo too. You know, as I just drove about 10,000 miles in the last 6 or 8 months down to Florida and all over and back. And I want you to know how much I appreciate standardization. When you're driving something that big and you're in the right lane, it's nice to know that signage and lane markings and things are pretty much the same from border to border and coast to coast. And when you run into unusual situations, it can really throw you. And I can see where confused drivers would lead to crashes and property damage and sometimes injury and death. And so to you highway engineers that sit around and try to standardize things, thanks for doing that. And it's satisfying to drive through Scott County and see how much we've comported with that, because I think it plays right into a comment that several of my colleagues have made about the UATs, the unmanned or the automatic vehicle thing that's coming. I know those are going to depend not only on GPS, but a lot on lane markings and signage to kind of sense where they are and what's happening around them. And I think that's the next big sea change that's coming. And that's going to radically change the ability of or the amount of traffic that can be put through a lane in an hour. And it's also, I think, going to change transit to smaller, more frequent, faster, and the ability for private individuals and companies to come into a market and flood it with autonomous vehicles that you don't have to ride with 30 other people. You can ride with yourself or 2 or 3 people. We're seeing that in several cities already with electric bikes and electric charging stations and things like that. Just some observations, and I know you guys are already into that game, already thinking about everything we build. How does it make it easy for that next technological step that's going to be another game changer for us? Related to that, at the legislative level, at the administrative level, there is this, I'll try not to be too disparaging, but there is an aspirational goal that they're trying to make a statutory commitment. And that is to reduce vehicle miles traveled by 20% within the next handful of years. Have you given any thought, or as you talk at AASHTO or among the county engineers, any initial reaction to what that means, and even if it's possible?
Well, it clearly has a big impact across the board in lots of areas. And while that's a great goal, it does impact, funding sources as well. And so it has an impact on how we maintain what we have currently. Yeah. So it's one thing to reduce the expansion of roadways, but, funding that is reliant on users of the system. Yes. To help support the system, that is an area that, has to be determined, has to be fully thought out in how that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of discussion in that arena. And that's probably the biggest factor is what impact does that have on user cost helping support the systems.
There are 2 things I thought about, and that's one of them. If there's that much less activity, What does that mean to revenue, even if it's based on revenue by mile, which they're going to launch again, another mileage-based user fee study is going to happen. I was part of the last one in 2011, 10, somewhere back there. They're going to roll it out again and come at it again. That's one thing. The other thing, though, is you tied transportation, especially our road system, directly to economic development and increased value. And I think there is a direct correlation between miles traveled and economic activity. And I'm wondering if these people that are thinking about forcing us to reduce our miles traveled have actually figured that into the equation. What does that mean in suppressing economic activity? Or do they think it can be done without suppressing economic activity? That's an open-ended question. I just want you to know that some people are thinking about that, and I haven't heard it addressed in the discussion yet. Related to that is all the mom and pop businesses at every one of the interchanges we build, they're called gas stations. They're called convenience stores. And that whole model has changed since I was a little kid, to where now it's bread, milk, and fill up the car. It used to be, can I wash your windshield, air your tires, and gas the car? And you went to the supermarket for bread and milk. Well, now that's combined, but each one of those stores is a little economic engine on that piece of property. So what happens when the government takes over charging stations, or that's all done at home overnight in the garage, and we're no longer stopping at convenience stores for gas, milk, and bread? These are questions that need to be considered, and I don't know they have been, but I'm sure that you and your team will be thinking about that and raising that as it's discussed. The last question has to do directly with money. How much did what were we expecting for county state aid last year, and how much actually came in? And what do you know what the shortfall was off the top of your head? Was it 20%, 15%?
I think it ended up being like 11% down.
Well, about 11 down. Okay, know that in a discussion yesterday at Transportation Alliance, we brought up this new round of money, the 2.8 billion the state is getting. Guidance says that we can use that to supplant lost revenue. We can't lower taxes with it, but to the extent that revenues were down from where we thought they should have been because of the pandemic, we can apply to Treasury to make that up. So your associations have been on that, and I'm sure the county engineers will be too. Yeah, it'd be nice if we could pick up 11% of the money that we thought we were going to get that we didn't get, as long as Washington's handing out money.
Other comments or questions? Well, thank you, Tony, and thank you for all the team and
Yes.
all the different parts of the team and how it all works together to make our roads work and be safe and get us to where we need to go. We really appreciate this presentation and your great work. Thank you.